Our final speaker today is Mr. Li Huihan, founder and CEO of My China Roots. Based in Guangzhou, Huihan leads a team of full-time researchers who help members of the Chinese diaspora find their ancestral villages, trace lineage, and even reunite with long-lost relatives. What sets My China Roots apart is the hybrid model, combining digital platforms with personalized on-the-ground research. Their work has been featured in major media, including the Netflix documentary Found. Today, Huihan introduces us to the Jiapu, the Chinese clan book, and teaches us how to find, read, and interpret these treasured volumes of family history. Before I bring in Mr. Li Huihan, we'd like to play a short video on My China Roots.
Every layer that I peel back, it's trying to bring that history to life, one story, one voice at a time.
I had an urge to go back to the village where my father came from, because honestly, we had a very disconnected relationship. He never told anything about his life in China or his life in America.
I'm trying to just keep an open mind and not have any expectations because given that my family has been in Canada for 100 years now, there's not much information that I'm expecting to still exist here in China.
It's very hard to find the exact time when he arrived, the exact time when he went back. And the records could be also lost, destroyed over time.
Can we find an ancestral hall? Can we find a family clan book? I don't know how exactly I would go about finding all of these things by myself, so I'm really glad that My China Roots has sent a researcher to accompany me. He will be standing in that cultural gap to help build trust, initiate conversations. He can help me understand the clues. It's a whole new world, and it's funny, I feel like I blend in here more than anywhere else I've ever lived, but at the same time, this feels like one of the most foreign environments that I've been in.
My father left the village and arriving in a foreign place, Boston, in 1932. I could see his eyes being in awe of all the things he was experiencing, all the sights and sounds. He was thrilled, but also scared at the same time. I can imagine that. I really now appreciate him so much of the sacrifice.
It's a bit overwhelming. It's really personal, I think, coming out here. My Taikong was a younger brother, and he moved to Canada. He was the only one that moved. This is his symbolic remains here, so there's no physical remains, but I guess he has a place here. From the get-go, I felt that stillness, that peace. I don't need to know every single storyline to belong to this family. Just seeing the culture of generosity that my relatives have shown me. It's beautiful. It's building community, starting right in your own home.
Yes, everyone, Mr. Li Huihan, all the way from Paris.
Hi, everybody, and apologies then if you had to hear all of the testing. But my name is Huihan. I'm the founder and CEO of My China Roots, and I'm very happy and honored to be here today with you. Unfortunately, it's online because I'm actually in Europe at the moment. I'm unfortunately not in Singapore with you all. But thanks to the organizers, GSS Family Search and Nathan's group CAR, I'm really happy to be doing this with you today. So maybe I'll, in terms of my presentation, let me just share. Let me just share my screen with you. So today we're going to have a discussion about jiapus or zupus, and especially what they are and how to find them. Now, maybe just a quick few words of introduction. My name is Hui Han. I was born and raised in the Netherlands. My parents are from Indonesia, and you can see here, basically these are 4 generations of marriages. So these are my on the left-hand side, my great-grandparents, in Indonesia, and then my grandparents. My grandparents were also born in Indonesia, but halfway in 1950. So with their young families, they moved to the Netherlands. And that's where my parents were married, and that's where I was born together with my 2 sisters. So I grew up in a very white Dutch countryside environment. We didn't speak any Chinese because it was way too long ago that my ancestors had left China. And I was always really interested in stories. And my grandfather would always tell me a lot of stories, and they would always be about Indonesia rather than China. While at the same time, he was telling us, well, we're a Chinese family, and my own parents would also say the same. And I would never really understand why all the family stories were about Indonesia and not about China, and why we would call ourselves Chinese if nobody that I knew, even my grandparents, didn't speak a word of Chinese. Had gone once, because my grandfather had gone in the early 80s, but that's it. We didn't know anybody in China. We ate long life noodles on birthdays, and that was really it. We didn't celebrate Chinese New Year. So I just became more fascinated by our family history, why we kept calling ourselves Chinese, so identifying with Chinese-ness, even though in practical life, there was no real Chinese-ness that I could discern. So I studied in the Netherlands and in the US, studied law. And then after that, I figured, well, if there's ever a good time to go to China and study the language and see what it's like, then now is the time. And that was about 20 years ago. I went to Beijing, studied Chinese, started working in consulting, so basically more business-minded career. But as I was doing so, I found myself at some point starting to trace my own family history in China. I found out that we were from Fujian, and particularly from Zhengzhou, so it's about 80 kilometers west of Xiamen. And that really led me to help other people, and it brought me to a moment where I was just thinking to myself, what am I doing with my life if during the weekends I'm working on family histories and helping other people trace theirs and finding a lot of fulfillment in that, as opposed to from Monday to Friday sitting in my office job, which was very warm and cushy financially, but it wasn't fulfilling emotionally and psychologically and socially. So I made a decision 2012, so it's 13 years ago, to do My China Roots full time. It started with very custom services, and today, the topic of today is basically, to a large extent, our database and our Jiapu Zupu database. So today, what we do, there are 3 pillars to our work. One is, as a user, you can build your family tree. Number 2 is, through building your family tree or through a direct search, you can discover the records of your Chinese ancestors. And number 3 are research and trips. And I will be talking about number 2 quite a bit. And then Cheryl, who is my colleague, is based in Singapore, and she's been with you all day. But if you have questions about research or trips, she will be there to answer any questions you have. So let's get into what a Zupu is. And let's start with just quickly terminology, because you probably have heard the terms Jiapu, Zupu, and I'm having a Mandarin accent, or I'm speaking Mandarin, Jiapu, Zupu, or Zunpu. And originally there was a clear distinction, and they're listed here from narrow to broad. Like a jia is a family, and so it's a more narrow branch, limited to a narrower branch. Zongzu, the zu is refers to a clan, and Zong also actually refers to a clan, but a broader clan. So it's essentially a matter of how far do you want to go back to establish the common ancestor that is the founder of your branch. A branch, of course, could be starting in your mind with an ancestor that lived only 100 years ago, but it could also be an ancestor that lived 2,000 years ago. And essentially that determines, of course, then how broad the branch has been growing. So today, in all honesty, I've seen many jiapu that were actually a lot more extensive than many zupu, but originally it would be the case that zupus would be more broad than jiapus, and zongpus would even be more broad. But again, today a lot of these words and names are used interchangeably. So a jiapu or a zupu is essentially a book that records the members of a clan who share a common place, origin, and ancestry, and they were very importantly compiled by the clan itself, often with the goal to reinforce a sense of clan identity. On average, so jiapus and zupus and even zongpus come in all shapes, sizes. Some are literally just a few pieces of paper with a family tree, a couple of names on them. Some are 13, 15 volumes of books with with over 100,000 names in them. On average, an average zupu would contain around 10,000 names in the family tree sections. So just quickly about a clan, because I think, so a group of people who share a common surname and ancestry, but I think why clan is particularly relevant in our context of family history is especially when you compare it, for instance, with the West. In Chinese genealogy context, clans are of great importance because they were the ones who maintained and preserved and updated the most important type of document that concerns family history, and that is the jiapu or zupu. Whereas in the West, you typically had more church and state, so central authorities that went across surnames that carried the responsibility of identity-related, family-related information. Census records, military records, school records, death records, those were all maintained typically by church or state-related institutions. So in the Chinese family history context, it's always important to go back to the clan and where in China your ancestors were from before, in your case, they moved to Singapore. And especially still today, if you go to, especially southern China, the large majority of villages so not talking about cities, but villages, they are typically dominated by 2, 3, or maybe 4 clans, surnames. And historically, that's because when a village was essentially the outgrowth of a clan. When one village was full, a younger son would basically go somewhere else, very often to cultivate new land, and that would turn into a branch, and that would turn into a clan. Unless, of course, there were other reasons like political or reasons of war, social unrest. But typically, villages were populated and still are by one clan or several clans. So in terms of who compiled this, I just mentioned it's very important that it's compiled by the clan itself. So typically the literary people among the clan. And this also means that when we all read a jiapu or a zupu, it's important to remember that the person who drafted it had certain interests. So again, to as I mentioned, to promote a sense of clan identity. So when it gets to the question of historical accuracy, it's just important to know that the person who drafted it, the clan member, had an interest, and sometimes that was linked to instilling a sense of pride for family members. And so, especially when you have lineages that go all the way back to the Yellow Emperor, which of course was a mythical personality himself, questions of historical accuracy are valid. Today, just quickly, too, clan associations are typically the key, or they have committees that still update and republish zupus, so new editions of zupus or jiapus or zongpus. And we do a lot of work with clan associations. For instance, if a family from Singapore would like to have their generation and their relatives added to the new edition of jiapu or zupu, then very often it's the case to find the relevant association in China and work with their editorial board to add new people, including women. That's actually quite a few requests that we're receiving, and women who were, of course, traditionally largely excluded from jiapu and zupu family trees, can they be included for a new edition? And then it really depends on the clan association and our negotiations with them on how that will then go. So zupu titles and zupus themselves, they can be organized. Well, they're actually always organized by clans, but in this case, for instance, you can see a Li clan zupu. So it's basically for a broad, going very broad, basically just having the surname Li as the common factor. But then you also have zupus that are organized by clan, by surname, in combination with an ancestral place. So, for instance, in this case, Baitang in Fujian, the Lis from Baitang, that's basically what the zupu covers. Then you also have zupus that are organized by a branch within a larger area for a surname. So in this case, the surname is Huang. The area is Dehua County, and then Meishan Tang. So Tang basically means it's like the Tang. It's a branch of a certain clan within the clan. And finally, it could also be organized by a common ancestor or along a certain ancestor that founded that branch. So now talking about the family tree sections in a jiapu or a zupu. So a jiapu or a zupu has different sections typically, and the family tree section, I would say, is the most important one. But as we will see in a bit, there are also ancestral biographies, generation poems. We'll talk a bit about that later. With respect to family trees, it is, I guess, as I gather, as we all know, heavily geared towards male family members. Sometimes there are wives mentioned. Very rarely, almost never, unfortunately, daughters. Because daughters were, after marriage, they would enter a new family and would thus be regarded as not being part of the clan, original clan anymore. What you also see with family trees in terms of the information is generation number. So in this case, you can see it's a bit small, but on the right-hand side, you see like 11, 12 there. So the generations, so horizontally, each row is a generation. Very often people have multiple names, which makes the work of family history research in Chinese context often more complicated, because maybe the name that your grandfather was known as in your family circles may have been a different name from the name that was listed in his jiapu or zupu. So they're nicknames, they're courtesy names, they're pseudonyms, they're just different types of names. And it's not even always the case that the courtesy name would be the one mentioned in zupu. It's quite, unfortunately, inconsistent. At least that's our experience of having done a lot of the research. And therefore, when you do want to do family history, research, it's always important to not be discouraged, first of all, if you have a name and that name doesn't appear in the Zupu, because there might well be other names that that person was known as. And therefore, it's important to, especially when you ask around in your family, to see if there are other names than just the one that you know of, for instance, your grandfather. Birthdays, death dates, burial place. I wouldn't say it's common. It's not uncommon either, but it's more common that the birth, death, and burial places are not mentioned. It's in the family tree portion of the Dapur Zupu. Its large majority of names will just be names, and then because of the generation numbers, we can deduce and analyze. Okay, roughly what era would they have been living in? But unfortunately, it's not common for every name to list a birth or death date. Here you do, this is an example of a family tree. Family trees are also drawn up in different formats. So this format is, well, this is a generation. So you see 3 generations here. This is the main person. These are wives. When you see this character, it basically means his wife. And then here's a little bit of biographical information about the date of birth. But this is a bit more extensive. This is here underneath. Cheryl, can you see my mouse? Just to, when I move my cursor. Okay, that's good to know. So then underneath is the son, also with wives, and then underneath is the grandson, basically. So that's one way of formatting family tree. And again, this one has quite extensive information about each of these individuals, about their birth. Here's a different format. It reads more like a telephone book maybe, or just a simple list of names and then their children. So basically you can, and wives. So this is information about sort of the third child or oldest child, and then very basic information. As I mentioned, unfortunately, women tended to be excluded from Zupu when talking about the majority of Dapus and Zupus. We are doing more and more projects where we're including it, we're discussing with today's clan association for an upcoming edition. But largely women who were included were wives, and how they were included was not typically by their full name, but essentially by their maiden name. So very often you see a character, she or she, and that just means that it's that character just means literally maiden name. So it's like Wang Shi or Li Shi. And that means that their birth surname was Wang or Li. And and so it typically doesn't include their personal name. Now, so there are other sections of Zupus, especially when the Zupus are a bit more, a bit larger. So there's legendary origins, so the origins story of a clan. There's biographies of famous ancestors, and generation poems. So generation poems are really important for research overall. A generation poem was essentially a collection of characters or a poem, and each successive character indicated the generation name, so a part of the name for each successive generation. So, for instance, my name is Hui Han, Wei Han. So Hui or Wei is my generation name. Han is my personal name, and Li is my family name. So I have a cousin, so my dad's brother's son, so a paternal cousin, he also has Hui in his name, Hui Yung. Actually, my sisters, which is not very common, but my sisters also have a generation name. Aiwen, Eileen, and I have a cousin, Ai Mei. So Ai is the generation name, in this case, for the girls the women in our family. But knowing the characters of these of your generation name. So, for instance, if you're trying to find your Zupu and you're trying to do family history research, knowing the generational characters of your family can help determining which Zupu is yours. So now let me switch to another screen to give you a demo. Well, in the meantime, if there are questions, please don't hesitate to ask Cheryl while I share my other screen. Sorry, Andy. Yeah, so let me just show you a bit about how the platform works, and then specifically, we talked a bit about what one can find in a Zupu or a Jiapu. Now let's see how you can find it. So our platform has about 20,000 Jiapu or Zupu that are all digitized, and most importantly, they're not just scanned and digitized, but they're also completely made searchable by name. And I will show you how that works. So one way of finding your Zupu is basically to start building your family tree. Now you can see my screen, the family tree, right? Yeah, okay. So you can see family tree. This is not very special, but you can just, it has regular functionalities of a family tree. You can, for instance, in terms of building it, you can create a new tree from scratch, of course, but you can also import an existing tree if you have it on a major platform. Elsewhere, you can export it typically from that platform and import it into ours so that you don't have to do everything, type in everything from scratch. You can have multiple branches. So for instance, in this case, Ella Wong is the key, so it's her lineages. But then if she's married to Charles, then he can have his own tree. And the most important thing that I want to talk about is the red icons that you see. Because when you input information of a family member, our system will recognize that in this case, so your great-grandfather was called Boon Pin Tan. So that is information that our system then cross-checks with the many millions of records that we have in our database. So our system will then automatically check for you which Boon Pin's surname Tans do we have in our database. Especially in this case, if you know that he died, you don't know when he was born, but he died in the early 1930s. So based on that information, and just quickly here you can see you can fill in information about what you do know about him, that so in this case he was a merchant in Singapore. He arrived at the age of 15. He was Hokkien. But then most importantly, our system feeds records to you that are relevant for that particular person in your family tree. So in this case, it recognized that in Bukit Brown Cemetery, there is a tombstone with the name of Boon Pin Tan. And so first what you can do is then you can compare the data that is on the tombstone with the data that is in your tree. So you can see, oh yeah, the first name is the same, last name is the same too. And then you can basically accept the record or you can ignore it. But let's have a look at this notification of a record that might be relevant for you. So in this case, on the tombstone, or all the characters that are on the tombstone, we've extracted, and to a large extent this was in collaboration with Raymond and GSS for Bukit Brown. And in this case, for instance, you can now see, okay, yeah, Boon Pin Tan, the name is the same and the death date is also the same. He's Hokkien, and you can see that because this birthplace, Tong An, you can then click and see, okay, yeah, Tong An is indeed Hokkien. You can see here on the map where in China that is. You can see here the administrative jurisdictions that Tong An falls under. So Tong An is part of Xiamen, which is part of Fujian province. So now what you can do with that information is you can use our system to look for other records that have Buntan or have the same name on them. But maybe more importantly, and especially because we're talking about Zupus, because on the tombstone is in Chinese. So now you know Chen is his last name, Wenbing is his name in Chinese. And what you can do now is do a search for the Chinese characters, for the records that carry the Chinese characters. And these are overwhelmingly Zupu. So you can see here, there are 808 Zupus that carry the name Chen Wenbing. And now, of course, the 108 is, of course, a bit too many to just basically look through. So what you can do now is, because you know that he was from Fujian, so you can filter down you can filter down by Fujian Zupus, and you just saw that he was from Xiamen. And within Xiamen, so there are now 10, the 108 results are now narrowed down to only 10 Zupus, Xiamen Zupus that have the name Wenbin in them. And what did we say? Tong'an. So Tong'an district inside Xiamen. So within just a minute, what would have been, I have now narrowed down and I have found 2 very concrete Zupu books that literally have the name of your great-grandfather. And you click, and then basically you immediately see the name inside the family tree, inside a Zupu. So because about 90%, over 90% of our users don't read Chinese, we have auto translation and auto transliteration functionality. So if I hover my mouse over any character, you can see at the bottom. You can see at the bottom of the screen the translation and the transliteration of, in this case, Wenbin, and you can then see, okay, where which generation. So in this case, he's the 20th generation. You can see what branch he is in, and so now, for instance, something else that you could do if you want to find out more information that is in the Zupu, you can, for instance, search for Singapore. Because you know that your great grandfather moved to Singapore, so you can see what else in the Zupu, for instance, would be written about Singapore. So you can just enter in any key term, a search term that you want, and then you can see basically, oh, this Zupu actually has a lot of pages that are about Singapore. And now what I want to show, if you read Chinese, obviously you can just read this directly, but because the majority of our users do not, we have this functionality that allows you to select, highlight an area, and basically it will then, you can see here, within a couple seconds, it extracted all the text, and you can translate it, and now you have the full text in English. So even if you don't read Chinese, our platform is specifically designed and built by and for the Chinese diaspora. So that means, from a linguistic point of view, tools like these allow you to understand records that are in Chinese. You can also upload, if you have a picture of your tombstone in a cemetery that we might not have digitized, then you can upload a picture, and you can do that. You can apply this functionality that I just showed to that picture that you uploaded. It also means, in terms of our focus on the Chinese diaspora, that the records that we have are specifically geared towards people with ancestry from Fujian and Guangdong, the southern 2 provinces that historically have delivered the most, at least before China's opening up, have provided most of the overseas Chinese. So I've showed you one way through the family tree to find your Zupu. Now, you don't have to go all the way through the process of building a family tree to find your Zupu. You can also just directly search for your ancestor's name in Nzopu. And there are different ways of searching. So we now have an AI search box where you can just basically type in a question. So for instance, my grandfather's first name was, let's say, Li Bang. His last name was Teo. He died in Singapore. Let's say that that's what you know about your grandfather. So you can just write your sentence, your question, and then basically our search engine is smart enough to then do a search basically. So in this case, there's a direct hit. So Teo Ben Lee also in Bukit Brown. So there's a tombstone here that has his name, and then same thing, you can then see does his birthplace, he's Hokkien, does his birthplace, does it correlate to what I know? So in this case, Anxi in Quanzhou. And similarly, you can now go and look for other records. So other records in English, using his English name, but also other records in Chinese. So I just clicked on his Chinese name, Ming Li, Zheng Ming Li. And same thing now, you can, because there are 49, so we have 49 tupus with the name Zheng Ming Li in them. So you can then again filter it down. You know now that he was from Fujian, and Anxi is in Quanzhou. So you can filter it down to Anxi, and same thing here, you can just examine each mentioning of his name. And yeah, so that's another way of basically finding your relative's name in Nzopu. And here again, you can use the extract text and translation tool. Here, and then show translation. So this is the translation of the biographical information that is in Nzopu. So what I want to show you now is it also concerns the content of Nzopu. So let's stick to the surname Zhang or Teo, and essentially what we also do is we then transfer, I guess, digitize the Nzopu in an even more contemporary way, where we extract the lineage of your lineage, for instance. So you basically see here, these are names of Zhang Shouli was the first ancestor, and he lived around 570 AD, so that's like 1400 years ago. And this is the direct lineage, his son, his grandson, his great-grandson. And then as you click on each name, basically you can see what the Nzopu writes about him. So, prominent poet, scholar, etc. Biographical information. So this is all information that is listed in the Nzopu. And you can just scroll your way down the complete lineage and see what is written on each ancestor in your Nzopu. Now, where, at least in my opinion, it gets really interesting is when you combine the information that is found in a Nzopu with the information that is found in other historical sources. A key other historical type of source is a county gazetteer, or a difengzhi. County gazetteers were maintained by local governments and are essentially location encyclopedias. So they talk about what was happening in a certain county then and then, what were the key crops that were grown on the farm fields, when were instances of social unrest, be it the Taiping Rebellion to any other type of social unrest. That type of information is to be found in gazetteers. So when you then align those two historical sources, the personal family history of a Dapo or a Zupu with the local history of a county gazetteer, and then maybe a third line of more general of global or Chinese history, what you then get is essentially a contextualized history of your family. And you can see here that this person that I just, Zhang Shichuan, here is an example of us having contextualized a Zupu. So we combined the information again that is written about Zhang Shichuan, and we know from the Zupu about roughly when he lived, and then from the gazetteer, we know what was happening, where he lived, when he lived, at that time and place. So, yeah, so this is an example of a migration map that we can then put together. It's completely interactive and dynamic, and you can just make your way through history. So on the left-hand side is a scrollable timeline, and you can, again, step in through the lens of your direct ancestors. You can make your way through history. So, okay, I think time is also, we're getting near the end. So, yeah, what we can do is we can share all these links that I've showed you, and you can go through it, look for it yourself at home too. So just go back to the slides and finishing the presentation. So I just showed you examples of Zupu, of translation tools. In total, our database has many more records than Zupu. Zupus are typically referred to as the holy grail of Chinese genealogy, but we have many other records, like clan association records, census records, yearbooks, business directories, Chinatown directories. And in total, we have far over 200 million searchable Chinese ancestors in all these types of records. And again, we're focusing particularly on ancestors from, or at least on ancestors of today's Chinese diaspora. Now, if you want to find your Zupu the old-fashioned way, the manual way, because of course there are many Zupus that are not in our database and are still to be found in villages at clan members' houses. In that case, we have a team on the ground based in Guangzhou, but a team of researchers, and they basically travel to Fujian and Guangdong, ancestral villages, to find Zupus and to then take pictures of that Zupu. So if you're interested in doing it the old-fashioned way, please have a chat with Cheryl about how we could help you. And with that, I thank you all for, hopefully, for your attention. One thing I would like to mention is that we are happy to provide a 50% discount on any service that we provide, so be it access to the Zupus online, to any research or travel service that you would like. And for that, you can have a chat with Cheryl. So again, thank you all.